Okay, so let's get into evidence of evolution. And if you'll notice here on the side, I'll go ahead and show you. There's some slides that I have skipped. I've actually skipped them, and we're not going to really talk about those because specifically the standard says that you're going to deal with that in high school. If you have questions about those, I do not mind if you ask me. We can talk about them, but that's not something that you have to know. It has to deal with vestigial structures and homologous structures. So we're just going to talk about this, and then we'll start talking about Darwin. Tell you a story. We'll pretty much be done. So fossil record, evidences for evolution. So if you think about the fossil record, a lot of scientists believe that we have common ancestors. So if you were to look at a family tree could look something like this. The trunk would be who we're related to back at the beginning, the first humans. And then as we go further away from them, we've got families and stuff like that. So let's say that you were in this spot right here. Let's go ahead and make this larger. Let's say that you were, this was us right here. This is, let's just say it's you in a family tree. You are closely related to these people. This would be something like a cousin. And then going back even further back in time and back in as far as relation, you're going to also be related to this person, but you're not going to be as closely related. Maybe this is like a great granduncle's sister, something like that. I'm sorry, great grandfather's sister or brother. And the further you go back, the less related you are to them. And so that's also what's happened with the fossil record. I don't know if you can visualize or understand what this picture is saying. But this is what the fossil record, what we think happened, what a lot of scientists believe happened. This is what we actually had in the record. So this is not the fossil record. This is, so it's kind of like playing connect the dots. If you ever play connect the dots, you can, or like in an old coloring book, you have, Ariel, the Little Mermaid, has an outline to her, and it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 20. And you're supposed to start with dot number 1, and then go to dot number 2, and then dot number 3, and then dot number 4. And you keep going until you've outlined Ariel completely, and then you color it in. So let's connect the dots. This is somewhat similar. So all of these things that you see are skeletons and fossils, and some of them actually living organisms that we can look at their bones. It's the bone evidence from living organisms. So up here at the top is the most recent. These are animals that are still alive. And if you go back further and further and further, some of these grayed out things are animals, organisms, or species that are extinct. So these species are still around. These species are extinct. And the further back you go, the less related we are to those organisms. So this organism and this organism are related, a lot of scientists believe, but it's very, very distant. And if you were to, you'd have to track it all the way back. They would have a common ancestor right here. If you're talking about somebody over here and somebody over here, their common ancestors way back here. We're talking huge amounts of time back. So that's why this is the fossil record. These are the dots that we have evidence of. We actually have bones from a bunch of different organisms, microscopic, extremely tiny shells, lizards, all the way up to think about dinosaurs or whales or just large animals, things like mammoths and other megafauna. So the fossil record is an evidence for evolution. I'm just going to read this. It says, scientists play an intricate game of connect the dots to piece evolutionary history together. So we have to make educated guesses to piece it all together. We may say that we think this organism and this other fossil that we found are kind of related back to here because they have these similar traits. Or the way that this leaf is set up is similar to this other leaf, and they have a similar structure, so we think these two plants are related. We can't go back in time, and we don't have all of the evidence like the picture on the left, but there is a lot of evidence. And I just realized, guys, I apologize if you can't see my mouse. I don't know if the mouse is showing up on the video. So a lot of that may not have made sense, so I apologize for that. I didn't think about that till just now. All right, there's not a whole lot to this slide. Law of superposition, that just means, and you don't have to know about this, you don't even have to write it down, but just let me explain. If this were the layers, these were different layers of the earth, you got the black layer up here and the wrinkled white layer. The law of superposition says that this white layer is going to be older than this black layer as long as nothing was disturbed. Because if you think about how rocks are formed, go back to sixth grade, sediments, let's say sedimentary rock. The rock settles here, and then later on, more dirt is put on top of it. So this would be the older layer, and this would be the younger layer. And if you have 20 different layers, the oldest will be at the bottom, the youngest will be at the top, assuming that nothing moved. So that's the law of superposition. So the further we go down in the dirt, the theory is the older the dirt should be. And there's some exceptions to that rule, but that's generally what that means. Let's talk about the dude named Charles Darwin. He sailed around the world on a ship called HMS Beagle, His Majesty's ship, or Her Majesty's ship, the Beagle. And he was the naturalist, kind of like the scientist. His job was to observe nature and to see what was going on. And he was along for the ride. I don't believe he was the first choice. He was actually the second or third choice, but he's the first one that said yes, and so he went, and in a way changed history in the process. So when he stopped off at the Galapagos Islands, he realized that the finches, which is a type of bird, these little birds, the finches were different than once. So Galapagos Islands, if you look on the map, Galapagos Islands are west of South America. So if you look kind of between South America and Australia, that distance between there and Asia, the Galapagos Islands, they're far away from the land, where most animals aren't going to be going back and forth between the island and the mainland. But these finches were similar to ones that he found on the South American coast, which is almost 600 miles away. So he started thinking, how are they are very similar, but they have different beak structure, different wings, different size. Like there's some definite differences between them. So he started to think. So I'm going to play a make-believe game. I'm going to tell you a story real quick to try to maybe give an example. So let's just say there were no such thing as large ground finch or warbler. There were only these cactus finch. And they lived on an island. And the island that they lived on had cactuses. And so this island is full of cacti, and there's all the birds or all the finches there look just like this. Well, let's just say, and there were other islands. Let's say there was another island over here, another island on the right side, and they were all full of these cactus finches. These birds did not exist. Well, let's just say over here on this island, there was a drought, and the cactus started, let's just say there was a disease spread to this island. And on this island, the birds that were there that looked like this, the birds that were there were used to eating cactus fruit. They could not break open seeds. And so a lot of the birds started dying because they did not have a food source. And then one of the birds that had a little bit larger of a beak, a thicker beak, like a beak for crushing, not eating fruit, but kind of can smush some smaller seeds, that bird found that it could start crushing small seeds and get a little bit more food than the rest. And that happened generation after generation after generation. And eventually, the birds on that island that had larger beaks, they could find a different food source that was not a cactus. And so they were able to live a healthier life, and they were able to reproduce more frequently. And that led to them being able to, just like I said earlier, they filled that niche better. So the birds with the larger beaks filled their niche a lot better than the birds with the smaller beaks. And so over time, I'm talking over hundreds or thousands of generations, the birds with larger beaks started filling the niche better, and the birds with smaller beaks started dying out. So the genes of the larger beak started populating that island a lot more so. And then over here, the same thing happened, but instead of larger beaks, because there weren't a whole lot of seeds and nuts, over here there was a lot of rocky formations, and birds with skinnier beaks filled that niche better. And so on this island, when the disease for the cactus came over to this island, the cacti started dying, and the finches, the warbler, or the finches that had skinnier beaks, they started getting insects, and they could provide for their offspring a lot better. And then that took hundreds and thousands of generations. And then also, because they blended in with the rocks that they were hunting on, predators like snakes or large lizards or other birds of prey did not eat them. So then over time, you have these three different animals. On this island, you have cacti finch, large ground finch, and over here, a warbler finch. and they evolved differently and made a new species. Speciation happened.